Hello and welcome to the Canon Reviewed, a podcast that looks at old books with new eyes and examines their continued relevance to contemporary readers. I'm your host, Daniel, and I'm delighted that you're here. Today, we continue our discussion of Shakespeare's Hamlet, focusing on the soliloquy, "Oh, that this too sullied flesh would melt." We'll put it in context, figure out what it means, and then see where and how it fits dramatically and thematically in the play. So please, pull up a chair by the fire, and let's begin. Oh, that this too sullied flesh would melt, thaw, and resolve itself into a dew. Or that the everlasting had not fixed his canon against self-slaughter. Oh, God, how weary, stale, flat, and unprofitable seem to me all the uses of this world. Fie, 'tis an unweeded garden that grows to seed. Things rank and gross in nature possess it merely. That it should come to this, but 2 months dead, nay, not so much, not 2, so excellent a king, that was to this Hyperion to a satyr, so loving to my mother that he might not beteem the winds of heaven visit her face too roughly. Heaven and earth must I remember. Why, she would hang on him as if increase of appetite had grown by what it fed on. And yet, within a month, let me not think on it. Frailty, thy name is woman. A little month, or ere those shoes were old with which she followed my poor father's body, like Niobe, all tears. Why she, even she, oh God, a beast that wants discourse of reason would have mourned longer, married my uncle, my father's brother, but no more like my father than I to Hercules, within a month. Ere yet the salt of most unrighteous tears had left the flushing in her galled eyes, she married. Oh, most wicked speed to post with such dexterity to incestuous sheets. It is not, nor it cannot, come to good, but break my heart. For I must hold my tongue. While these aren't Hamlet's first lines in the play, it is the initial moment that we, as an audience, are alone with him. Now, I mentioned last time that it's in these soliloquies that we come to know him best. Really get inside the inner turmoil and genius, frankly, that is the young prince. But first, let's back up a bit and set the scene for this soliloquy. "Oh, that this too sullied flesh would melt" occurs just after the new king has held court and dished out some directives to agents and minions. He then turns his attention to Hamlet, dragging his nephew's grief into the limelight. We ended last week with Claudius's public chastisement of Hamlet, overpowering him with his stern judgment of Hamlet's unmanliness. But before we break down the soliloquy line by line, let's look at Hamlet's first few lines before it. Now, Claudius, after other business is concluded, turns to Hamlet and says, "But now, my cousin, Hamlet, and my son." And here, one of the greatest asides ever, as Hamlet interrupts the king's line and turns to us and mutters, "A little more than kin and less than kind," meaning that their double relationship, that of both father-son and uncle-nephew, makes them more than kin. And the kind part, well, that's a little more old-timey, in that Hamlet's calling their relationship unnatural. He isn't talking about kindness. But 2 things come from this little jab that Hamlet lets us in on. One, he establishes a relationship early on in this play with us, the audience. We see right now that we're going to be in on everything, co-conspirators, confidants. And we also learn that there's already a sense of antagonism between the king and his nephew. I mean, of course, it's clear where this comes from. Hamlet lost his father, his throne, watched his mom marry his uncle shortly after the funeral. His soliloquy speaks to this, sure, but the king's first speech, which actually opens Act 1, Scene 2, also declares this as kind of necessary exposition for the play. But in this scene, what we must focus on is that Hamlet is the very picture of grief and bewilderment. Claudius asks again in front of everyone, "How is it the clouds still hang on you?" In answer to this, we get Hamlet's humor, his touchiness, his condescension and sarcasm, all rolled up in one and revealed by, "Oh, not so, my lord, I am too much in the sun." You can hear the smirk. And now Gertrude steps in, Hamlet's mother, and tries to speak to him. Now let me quote her in full, because there's beauty in what she's saying, yet Claudius will use her ideas later in an unkind way. "Good Hamlet, cast thy nighted colour off, and let thine eye look like a friend on Denmark. Do not forever with thy veiled lids seek for thy noble father in the dust. Thou know'st 'tis common, all that lives must die, passing through nature to eternity. If it be, why seems it so particular with thee?" As a response, we get Hamlet's first substantial line. He flushes in anger and says, "Seems, madam." Nay, it is. I know not seems. 'Tis not alone my inky cloak, good mother, nor customary suits of solemn black, nor windy suspiration of forced breath, no, nor the fruitful river in the eye, nor the dejected haviour of the visage, together with all forms, moods, shapes of grief that can denote me truly. These indeed seem, for they are actions that a man might play, but I have that within which passes show. These but the trappings and suits of woe. Here, we're introduced to that theme of acting. We brought it up last episode, of passing show. And since not a single word in this play is wasted, this very speech sets up the idea that what we present on the outside often hides or at least disguises or veils what we have going on the inside. You know, Gertrude is asking why he's still wearing his mourning clothes, and Hamlet's like, "Anyone can wear black, Mom, but I'm not acting sad. I am sad. Heartbroken. These clothes are the trappings of woe, the superficial outfit that suggests the inner truth. You know, all the stuff you're seeing on the exterior, well, you can't imagine what's happening in my mind. I'm not pretending to be grief-stricken because I want to," says Hamlet. "It just is what it is. Seem sad? No." Now, this is our real introduction to Hamlet. He is wounded, vulnerable, confused, shattered, and Claudius, sensing this, lets him have it in a public forum, with that speech with which we concluded the last episode. The gist of which is this: "Hamlet, dads die. That's how it works. Get over it. You're acting like a baby, making a display of yourself. You're being unmanly. And you're staying here where I can keep an eye on you." And Mom's like, "Hamlet, just give me my son back." And everyone exits the scene, leaving Hamlet alone to pour out his first soliloquy. So let's now go ahead and break that down, line by line. Okay, so all soliloquies are titled by their first line. And so this one begins with, "Oh, that this too sullied flesh would melt, thaw, and resolve itself into a dew, or that the everlasting had not fixed his Canon against self-slaughter." Now here we have a number of interesting things happening. Essentially, Hamlet kind of just wishes he could disappear. But more than that, and shocking to an audience of both his day and now, is the introduction of a thought that will return to him later. This notion or contemplation of ending his own life. If it weren't a mortal sin, he thinks, well, then... Now we will find that Hamlet, if not deeply religious, is a God-fearing believer, and this fretting over doctrine will work itself out within him a number of times throughout the play, but always as an agent that prevents him from a course of action. Sometimes, thankfully, and sometimes not so much. He continues, "Oh, God, how weary, Stale, flat, and unprofitable seem to me all the uses of this world. Fie, 'tis an unweeded garden that grows to seed. Now, we sometimes consider Hamlet a pre-existential text for lines like this, which Hamlet often utters in his moments of despair throughout the play. He looks around and sees nothing. Nothing worth anything, anyway. But now he clarifies a bit where this feeling comes from, comparing Denmark to a weedy, grotesque garden. Gross and rank are wonderful words here. Denmark has become, in whatever sense of it, corrupted. Next, he'll give us some exposition, or at least the background to his own confusion and grief. It's mostly about his dad and how much he loved his mom and how much his mom loved the old king back, but within it, too, is this unkind and unflattering comparison between his father and his uncle. That it should come to this. But 2 months dead. No, not so much, not 2. So excellent a king that was to this Hyperion to a satyr, so loving to my mother that he might not beteem the winds of heaven visit her face too roughly. Heaven and earth must I remember. Why, she would hang on him as if increase of appetite had grown by what it fed on, and yet, within a month, let me not think on it, frailty, thy name is woman, a little month, or ere those shoes were old with which she followed my poor father's body, like Niobe, all tears, why even she, oh God, a beast that wants discourse of reason would have mourned longer, married with my uncle, my father's brother. But no more, like my father, than I to Hercules, within a month, ere yet the salt of most unrighteous tears had left the flushing in her galled eyes, she married. Okay, well, what do we learn here? Well, for one, some timeline stuff. Hamlet's dad has been dead for less than 2 months, and in little over a month, his mother remarried to his uncle, whom Hamlet says is essentially a goat man compared to the sun god that was his dad. But he breaks off for a bit to talk about the love his parents had for each other. This is really the source of his confusion and anger at his mom. Hamlet's dad was so gentle with her, so protective, and she loved him so much that her love fed on itself and grew like twice-fold daily. Well, why bring this up here, though? Well, part of Hamlet's grief stems from his inability, like I said, to understand just why his mom would do this. So his uncle is such a pale comparison, and she loved his dad so much. Now, this is such a common human experience, and many of us can immediately relate to Hamlet if we've had a parent remarry. Personally, my mom remarried a decade after my dad died, and I was still as ungenerous about it as Hamlet, though I, like Hamlet, had good reason. But moving on. Hamlet's gift for metaphor and poetry is also introduced to us here. He says that, before her funeral shoes were even old, she wore them for the wedding, and he compares her to Niobe, who in Greek myth lost her children and was forever weeping. And then he's like, man, even an animal would think it proper to mourn a little longer than that. And then, in a self-effacing moment, which is another trait that we'll come to admire in Hamlet, Hamlet once again disses his uncle by saying that he's no more like his dad than Hamlet is to Hercules. Now, we also, and this is important, we shouldn't shy away from another theme that is introduced here as well. In the midst of his rant questioning his mother's choices, he says quite famously, "Frailty, thy name is woman." This parenthetical, misogynistic aside is off-putting, and yet lines like it are scattered throughout the play, and Hamlet's treatment of the 2 principal female characters in the text is often questionable. But ironically, and Hamlet will consider this too, at some points, well, maybe most points, the most frail person in Elsinore is Hamlet himself. And he will become more frail as time passes. And now, to end the soliloquy. Oh, most wicked speed, to post with such dexterity to incestuous sheets. It is not, nor it cannot, come to good, but break my heart, for I must hold my tongue. Now, this idea of incest, pervades the play somewhat. It's one of Hamlet's chief accusations against the king and his mother. And now, technically, it's not really incest, but just 50 years or so prior to the writing of this play, Henry VIII cited the fact that his first wife was initially married to his brother as his primary reason for divorcing her. So, I guess this kind of thing was in the zeitgeist of the time. Still, it's weird. And the hastiness of the marriage also had the immediate effect of disenfranchising Hamlet, keeping him from the throne. And this, in turn, leads to his powerlessness. Now, hauntingly, Hamlet says that it cannot come to good, perhaps foreshadowing the events of the play itself. He confesses to his broken heart and that he must keep quiet because there's no use in anything anymore anyway. What an absolutely lovely, theme-rich, hyper-powerful soliloquy. We already know so much about Hamlet, his inner turmoil, how his mind works, some of his qualities. It's a compelling introduction indeed. And plot-wise, we learn that he is already predisposed to believe what the ghost of his father will tell him about his uncle, and Claudius's hand in his murder. Then Horatio, Hamlet's dearest friend, finds him, and they share some small talk, and when Hamlet asks why Horatio's back in town, his friend replies that it was for his father's funeral, and Hamlet's like, "No, you mean for my mother's wedding." And he makes a joke about how the hot food served at the funeral became like the cold cuts at the wedding reception. Horatio's then like, "Yeah, it seemed kind of quick, but Hamlet, I need to tell you something. I saw your dad." "Me too," says Hamlet. And Horatio's like, "What? Where?" And Hamlet says, beautifully, but also confused by Horatio's aspect, "In my mind's eye, Horatio." "Oh, that's cool," says Horatio, "but I actually saw him." And he tells Hamlet the story of the ghost the night before, and they agree to meet on the battlements at midnight to see if the ghost will speak to his son. Hamlet swears everyone to secrecy, and they depart. And then we cut to a scene with the Polonius family. Laertes is heading to France, and this gives his blowhard of a dad an opportunity to lecture him about how to behave, including that famous chestnut, "Neither a borrow nor a lender be." And when Polonius heads off after inquiring about what's going on between his daughter Ophelia and Hamlet, Laertes cautions her to be careful with Hamlet, since he'll probably only break her heart. But importantly, we learn another part of the play's backstory. Hamlet and Ophelia have something going on, and this will be used against Hamlet. We then meet Hamlet, Horatio, and the guards at midnight, and sure enough, the king comes and beckons his son to follow. Now, we get another theme, and this one too on the religious side of things, and something that will trouble Hamlet throughout the play. What is this ghost? Is it a specter of his real dad, or a demon sent to tempt him, to see a way in through his grief to get him to do bad things? Now, Horatio's worried about this too. He begs Hamlet not to follow, but Hamlet, who says he no longer cares much about his life anyway, lets the ghost of his father lead him to another room to tell his son everything. Thank you so much for sitting by the fire with me. Hey, please rate and review the podcast, as it does make it easier for others to find. And if you like what you're hearing and intrigued by where it's going, please consider supporting the show on Patreon at patreon.com/The Canon Reviewed. You'll find a few tiers to choose from, as well as an invite to our Discord community. I've begun to slowly put these episodes up on YouTube as well, so do me a favor and search for the podcast there and subscribe. I'd really appreciate that. Now look, this podcast is a conversation as much as anything, so please send an email to thecanonreviewed@gmail.com with your thoughts and observations about the works under study, as I'd love to include them in future episodes. What do you think of Hamlet's character when we first meet him? Too pouty? Weak? Or do you identify, as I do, I must admit, with his confusion and grief brought on by such unusual circumstances? I'd also like to take a quick moment here to thank our two head librarians, Jeff Seplak and Jesse Cunningham, for their continued support on Patreon, and to once again remind folks that they have a pretty spacious office with plenty of room for a few more desks. Well, I'll see you next time, where we head into Act 2 and discuss its lone soliloquy, "Oh, what a rogue and peasant slave am I." Okay, so what does Hamlet's father tell him? What quest will he set his son upon? What was Hamlet's prophetic soul all set and ready to hear? Okay, buckle up. This might take a while. I'll try to make it very clear when Hamlet Jr. is responding to his father, but here goes. The ghost speaks. I am thy father's spirit, doomed for a certain term to walk the night, and for the day confined to fast in fires till the foul crimes done in my days of nature are burnt and purged away. But that I am forbid to tell the secrets of my prison house. I could a tale unfold whose lightest word would harrow up thy soul, freeze thy young blood, make thy two eyes like stars start from their spheres, thy knotted and combined locks depart, and each particular hair to stand an end, like quills upon the fearful porpentine. But this eternal blazon must not be to ears of flesh and blood. List, list, oh list, if thou didst ever thy dear father love. Oh God! Revenge is foul and most unnatural murder. Murder? Murder most foul, as in the best it is, but this most foul, strange, and unnatural. Hasten me to know it, that I, with wings as swift as meditation or thoughts of love, may sweep to my revenge. I find thee apt, and duller shouldst thou be than the fat weed that roots itself in ease on Leth Wharf. Wouldst thou not stir in this? Now, Hamlet, hear, 'tis given out that, sleeping in my orchard, a serpent stung me. So the whole ear of Denmark is by a forged process of my death rankly abused. But know, thou noble youth, the serpent that did sting thy father's life now wears his crown. Oh, my prophetic soul, my uncle, aye, that incestuous, that adulterate beast with witchcraft of his wit, with traitorous gifts, oh, wicked wit and gifts that have the power so to seduce, won to his shameful lust the will of my most seeming virtuous queen. Oh, Hamlet, what a falling off was there from me, whose love was of that dignity that it went hand in hand even with the vow I made to her in marriage, and to decline upon a wretch whose natural gifts were poor to those of mine. But virtue, as it never will be moved, though lewdness court it in the shape of heaven, so lust, though to a radiant angel linked, will sate itself in a celestial bed and prey on garbage. But soft, methinks I scent the morning air, brief let me be, sleeping within my orchard, my custom always of the afternoon. Upon my secure hour thy uncle stole, with juice of cursed Hebena in a vial, and in the porches of my ear did pour the leprous distilment, whose effect holds such an enmity with blood of man that swift as quicksilver it courses through the natural gates and alleys of the body, and with a sudden vigor doth posset curd, like eager droppings into milk, the thin and wholesome blood. So did it mine, and a most instant tetter barked about, most lazar-like, with vile and loathsome crust all my smooth body. Thus was I, sleeping, by a brother's hand of life, of crown, of queen, at once dispatched, cut off, even in the blossoms of my sin, unhouseled, disappointed, unanelled, no reckoning made, but sent to my account with all my imperfections on my head. Oh, horrible, horrible, most horrible. If thou hast nature in thee, bear it not. Let not the royal bed of Denmark be a couch for luxury and damned incest. But, howsoever thou pursues this act, taint not thy mind, nor let thy soul contrive against thy mother aught. Leave her to heaven, and to those thorns that in her bosom lodge to prick and sting her. Fare thee well at once. The glowworm shows the matin to be near, and begins to pale his ineffectual fire. Adieu, adieu, adieu. remember me.